Friends, this morning we are starting a new sermon series called Go Fish. And no, it's not about the card game. It's about how we are meant to answer Jesus' call that we fish for people. So today I am reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 14 through 20. And this is Mark's version of the story that Jerry read for us earlier this morning from Luke's Gospel. So from Mark, chapter 1, verse 14. After John, that was John the Baptist, was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee announcing God's good news, saying, "Now is the time. Here comes God's kingdom. Change your hearts and lives and trust this good news." As Jesus passed alongside the Galilee Sea, he saw two brothers, Simon and Andrew, throwing fishing nets into the sea, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," he said, "and I'll show you how to fish for people." Right away, they left their nets and followed him. After going a little farther, he saw James and John, Zebedee's sons, in their boat repairing their fishing nets. At that very moment, he called them. They followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired workers. May God add wisdom to the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words. I have a question for you this morning, and I don't want you to necessarily answer it out loud. Just think about it. Why are you here today? What compelled you to come to worship this morning? Was it because it's what you always do on Sunday mornings? Or was it because you wanted to see your friends? Was it because someone woke you up and nudged you out of bed and said, "Get up, it's time to go to church"? Or was it because there's something not quite right in your life right now? Maybe you're dealing with a crisis, or you needed to hear a positive message that everything's going to be okay. Well, the truth is we are all here for a reason, although those reasons are probably different for each one of us. But one thing is clear: we are all here because of Jesus Christ. Either we're looking for Jesus to be more active in our lives, or we know that being in a relationship with Jesus is already an important part of who we are. Today, as I mentioned earlier, we are starting a new series called Go Fish. It is a series about fishing, but it's also a series about fish. Because when you get right down to it, there are two types of people. There are those who are fish and those who are fishers of fish. Let's talk about the fish first. Fish are people who are looking for answers. They're looking for a way to get relief from their troubles. They're looking for the answer to that gnawing question: why? Why did I lose my job? Why am I so unhappy? Why did I get sick? Why did the person I love have to die? Why can't I find someone to share my life with? Why is my marriage falling apart? Why is my world crumbling around me? Why? 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 And you know, just like fish, folks who are searching for answers swim around aimlessly, looking for ways to mend their broken lives. They might look for answers in a self-help book, or they might check it out on TV by watching so-called experts like Dr. Phil. Or they might be looking for answers in the bottom of a bottle, or on the shelf of the medicine cabinet, or from a drug dealer out on the street. But what they're really looking for cannot be found in a book, or on TV, or in a bottle, or in a pill. What they're looking for is something that will last. Happiness that is unending. Joy that is eternal. Now, I bet some of you are thinking, boy, I'm sure glad I'm not a fish. But you know what? The truth is we've all been fish at one point or another in our lives. In fact, some of us might even be fish right now. Because we've all been seekers. We're all looking for something that will help us solve our problems, the things that will make us happy and ways to have a better life. So even though you may not want to be a fish, or maybe even though you think you're not a fish, the truth is, yeah, y'all are fish. In fact, we've all been fish. We were all fish once. And then there are the fishers. These are the people who are going out and finding the fish. But more importantly, they're the people who have found the answer to their problems through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And because they experience joy in that relationship, they want to share it with others. They are the ones who were called by Jesus and who answered his call. They are the ones who are looking for other fish because that's what fishers do. They go out and they fish. They go fish. Now, you know what I appreciate about today's gospel message is that Jesus knew the difference between fish and fishers. He also knew what he needed to do in order to get the attention of the fish that he wanted to catch, namely the disciples, the ones who would eventually follow him and learn how to fish for people. He knew he had to do 3 things in order to compel them to answer his call. First, Jesus had to meet their needs. Now, in Luke's version of this story, which we heard earlier today, Jesus catches the would-be disciples when times are not going very well, at their lowest point. They'd been up all night fishing, and their nets had come up empty. They were tired and they were cranky. Life as they knew it was pretty bleak. Then along comes Jesus, a carpenter from Nazareth. He convinces them to go out fishing again, this time in the middle of the day, which, by the way, is the worst time to go out fishing because guess what? The fish can see you coming, and they run away or swim away. So the men, though, humor Jesus. After all, he's just a silly carpenter, right? So they go out into the deep water and they drop their nets. And lo and behold, the place where Jesus told them to fish, when they bring their nets back up, they are bursting at the seams. Now, these first disciples were fishermen. This was how they made their living. This was how they supported their families. And so they needed those fish. They couldn't go home empty-handed. And guess what? Jesus provided them with the fish they needed. He met their needs by filling their nets. 1 down, 2 to go. Second, Jesus had to get them to follow him, which, if you read the scriptures carefully, wasn't a hard thing to do. If you think about it, the fishermen in Jesus' day, they made their living catching fish. They were professionals. They should have known what they were doing, but that day they didn't, obviously, because they weren't catching any fish. So then this carpenter comes up, who probably never fished a day in his life, but he knew where the fish were. He helped them fill their nets. So when Jesus suggests to them, follow me, what do you think they're going to do? Well, of course they're going to follow him because he knew what he was doing. He knew where to find the fish. They would have been silly not to have followed him, especially after what they had just witnessed. So the passage from Mark says that right away, those fishermen left their nets and followed him. They did not pass go. They did not collect $200. They didn't even say goodbye to their family and friends. They dropped everything they had and followed. That's 2 down. And you know, most of the time when we read this story, that's where our brains kind of stop. We stop at the point where Jesus says follow. We put a lot of emphasis and energy on following because after all, that is what being a Christian is all about, right? Following Jesus. As Christian people who follow Jesus, we know that following is the foundation of our lives. Following Jesus and learning from him grounds us and sets us in the right direction. Following Jesus and learning from him helps us do the work that needs to be done. Following Jesus and learning from him not only makes our lives better, but also transforms the world. So following Jesus is critical. It was critical then, and it is critical now. But it wasn't the most important part of Jesus' message that day. Now there was still the third thing, the real agenda that Jesus needed to communicate to his disciples. You know, Jesus didn't say, come follow me and I will make you a better person. He didn't say, come and follow me and I will fix your marriage. Or I will help you find a job. Or I will heal whatever ails you. No, Jesus said, come follow me and I will make you fishers of people. Fishers are the ones who look for the fish. They bring in the fish. They go out and make disciples. They work to transform the world. And that's why we have to look beyond Jesus' command simply to follow. We must be willing to hear the rest of his directive. Come, follow me, and I will really show you how to fish. Friends, do you know someone who is a fisher? I'm sure you all do, you just don't know it. They're the ones who aren't afraid to share their faith story with other people, with people who are floundering. They're not afraid to pray with others and invite them to come and join in worship. Do you know someone like that? Maybe that was the person, the fisher who saved you when you were a floundering fish. Maybe a fisher invited you to come to worship either at this church or a different church. Maybe they were the person who caught you at your lowest point and invited you to that Bible study or that fellowship group where you had breakfast. Did your fisher invite you to get to know Jesus and consider being in relationship with him? Did your fisher share that God's love and grace and presence can help us endure all things? If you've ever met a fisher, and I suspect most of you have, you know that they are doing important work because they helped you realize that following Jesus gives us strength, courage, comfort, compassion, hope, direction, and grace. And so now, my friends, it is our turn to be fishers. But how do we do that? How do we go from being followers to fishers? Well, that's part of what we're going to be exploring over the next several weeks. We're going to look at ways that we can fish, how we can invite other fish who are struggling to find meaning in their lives. We'll consider some practical methods, some proven methods that we can use to invite others into a relationship with Christ. Because, my friends, the time has long passed for us to wait for the fish to come to us. They're not going to do it. We, like any good fisherman, must go to where the fish are. We must be patient, yet persevere. We must have courage because sometimes fishing is uncomfortable and intimidating. Like any good fisherman, we must have an eye for the right moment to fish. We must vary our fishing methods, watching and waiting for ways for us to turn our conversations with the fish in our lives toward that which is spiritual in nature. And we also have to have faith, not only that the fish are there, because they are, but also that God will guide us to those fish that we are meant to catch. And most of all, we must remember that we are not catching fish for our own personal gain. We are catching fish to make disciples for Christ and transform the whole world one fish at a time. As people who are called by Jesus to be his disciples, we are not only called to follow, but to fish. And God has placed us, each of us, in the perfect position to be fishers of men and women, because we've all been fish before at one time or another, and each of us has our own faith story to tell. A fish story. You know about fish stories, right? You know, it was this big. But our fish stories are about a time when our lives were messy and smelly, and how someone who was one of Jesus's fishers caught us just in time and invited us into a relationship with Christ. They showed us how to pray for the things we need and how Jesus provides for our needs. And because Jesus provided, we became followers. And because we became followers, we now must become fishers. Did y'all know that Mark Twain loved to fish? He did. He just hated catching fish. You see, when Mr. Twain would go fishing, he did it to relax, not necessarily to catch any fish. And in fact, he felt that catching fish was actually ruining his ability to relax. But he knew that if he got the idea that, or if he told people he was going to relax, that they would think that he was lazy. So he didn't want to tell them that. So instead, he would tell them that he was going fishing. And then he could relax all he wanted. And here's what he did. He would go to the lake with his fishing pole, a line, and a bobber, but he didn't have a hook on the end. So when he would cast his bobber out into the water, and then he could just lay back and relax. People thought he was fishing, right? And so they would say, "Look, he's fishing. Don't bother him." And he could relax all he wanted. Well, when you think about it, Mr. Twain is a lot like some of the Christians we know. They have their fishing pole in the water, but they don't have a hook on the end. They're not really fishing. They're relaxing. I wonder what Jesus would think about that. So I started this message by asking you an important question. Why are you here? Could it be it's because one of Jesus's fishers caught you when you were a floundering fish and nudged you to follow Jesus? Well, if that's the case, now it's time for us to take the next step, to be more than a follower. Not that being a follower is bad, but it's not the main objective. We follow Jesus, a Jewish carpenter from Nazareth, because a group of people, disciples, learned that being a follower means becoming a fisher. We were all fish once. Some of us still are. We've transitioned, though, into followers, and so now we must take that next step and be fishers, because there are an awful lot of fish out there who need to be caught. They need to hear the good news. So what do you say? Shall we grab our fishing poles and go fish? Amen.